few months ago, as many people found their hope for the future dashed as their stock market portfolios tanked, they were asking the question, now what do I do? Now what am I going to do? A man in his early 50s thought that he was in the job that was going to take him through to retirement, but found that he had been laid off because his job had been right-sized. And so as he was out of the job, he asked the question, now what am I going to do? That's exactly what the disciples were asking on that first Easter morning. Now, or on that, not on the first Easter morning, but on that Sabbath day, before the Easter morning, they were saying, now what am I going to do? This man that they had devoted their life to had been crucified. This man that they had followed, they had left their fishing nets to follow him. They had left other jobs, other trades to follow Jesus, to devote their life to him. And now he was gone. Now, what am I going to do? The disciples probably gathered together on that Sabbath day and talked about what was going on. I can imagine that some of them just wanted to spend time alone as they tried to work through and deal with their grief. Now, we don't know much about what happened on that Saturday. And the reason is that the Gospels were written years after Jesus' death and resurrection. And so when the disciples were walking through that Saturday, it was a very significant day. It was a very painful day. But in light of the resurrection, all that happened on that Saturday was forgotten. So none of the Gospel writers wrote about the Sabbath day, but they wrote about the resurrection day. They wrote about the Easter day. They wrote about the day that the tomb was empty. The resurrection overshadowed the pain of their grief. So let's move on with the story. The Sabbath is over. And very early, on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? Now, the women were going to the tomb where Jesus' body had been laid with spices. They were going to put the spices on his body, which is something that was traditionally done when someone had died. And I think the women were so overcome with grief that they did the things that you normally do when you're grieving, but it wasn't until they were headed to the tomb that someone asked the question, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? Now, as you look at the picture of this tomb, this is a tomb like Jesus was probably buried in. Although Jesus' tomb was a borrowed tomb, this was what the tomb of a very rich person would look like. It was one that was dug out of the rock, kind of a cave in a mountainside, and there was a stone placed over the opening to that tomb. Now, I always thought that there was a large boulder that was placed in front of that tomb, but it was more like the type of stone that you see next to that opening. It was a large, round, flat stone that was kind of put on some sort of a track or a gully there that was on an incline. And when they got ready to close the tomb, it took several men to roll that tomb or roll that stone in that little trough or gully. But the incline, the gravity helped to roll it into place a little bit easier. And when that stone got in front of the doorway, it dropped into a hole. And so, as it took many men to close the tomb, it would have been much more difficult to get the stone away from the tomb. And these three ladies realized that they could not do the job. And so they asked one another, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? But when they got to the tomb, when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed with a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Don't be afraid, he said. You are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene who was crucified, and he is risen. He is not here. The empty tomb has been the the argument of many skeptics for 20 centuries. For those who say that the friends of Jesus came and stole the body away, but no one has been able to answer the question, how could they have done that? It seems more likely that it would be enemies of Jesus that were able to steal the body away, because if they would have steal the body away and then people would claim that he had been resurrected, they could produce the body and say, see, the resurrection is alive because here's his body. So it probably was not the enemies of Jesus that stole his body away. And also the disciples, the friends of Jesus, could not have stolen the body away because there were soldiers that were posted at the tomb for the very purpose of making sure that his body was not stolen. Not only were there soldiers posted there, but also the tomb had been sealed with the great seal of Rome. And anyone that would break that seal would be in danger of losing their own life. It doesn't seem that enemies of Jesus stole the body. It doesn't seem that friends of Jesus stole the body. But rather the most likely explanation of what happened was that the body had been resurrected, just as the angel has said, he is risen, he is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go and tell the disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. The women were the first to receive the news of the resurrection. And they were instructed to go tell the disciples and Peter. Now, Peter was one of the disciples, but the instruction was not simply go tell the disciples, but go tell the disciples and make sure that you tell Peter that he is risen. Why is that? Why were they supposed to specifically take the message to Peter? You'll remember Simon Peter. When Jesus first called him, his name was Simon, but Jesus gave him the name Peter because he said, Peter, you are the rock on which I am going to build my church. Peter was an important leader among the disciples. Jesus seemed to indicate that Peter was going to have an important part in carrying on his ministry after he was gone. But in the last few days, in the hours just before Jesus' death, Peter denied his Lord. At the Last Supper, Jesus said to Peter, before the rooster crows in the morning, you're going to deny me 3 times. Peter adamantly objected. He said, oh no, Lord, I would never deny you. These other jokers, these other disciples, they may deny you, but I will follow you even to my own death. Jesus said, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows in the morning. Peter didn't think it was possible. But when Jesus was arrested and all the disciples scattered, we're told that Peter and one of the other disciples followed the soldiers who were leading Jesus away to the house of the high priest. And Peter was out in the courtyard outside the home of the high priest. And there was a servant girl there warming herself by a fire. No one of importance, no one that really mattered as Peter was talking to her. And yet this servant girl says to Peter, weren't you one of his followers? Weren't you one of the disciples of this man from Galilee? And Peter said, no. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know him. I'm not one of his followers. Not once, not just twice, but 3 times. Peter denies knowing Jesus. And in the Gospel of Luke, it tells us that when Peter denied Jesus the 3rd time, at that moment, Jesus was in a place that he could see Peter. And he looked in Peter's direction and said, Jesus looked straight at Peter. And I'm sure that as Peter heard the rooster crow, he remembered Jesus' words saying that he would deny him 3 times. And Peter probably looked in Jesus' direction. And so in that moment of Peter denying Jesus, Peter looked at Jesus, and Jesus looked straight at Peter.